Next speaker is Trish Jordan. She had a bit of a hectic flight in late last night, but she made it and she's here to give her talk. Trish is the Public and Industry Affairs Director with Monsanto and is responsible for media relations, which is a very important topic for us, especially in these current times.
Thank you. I don't know.
She also looks after issues management and providing communication strategies for Monsanto. She manages Monsanto Canada's Grower Advisory Council and the company's recent efforts to share the story of modern agriculture with consumer audiences. Previously, Trish worked with the Alberta Wheat Pool and later with the Canadian Food Grains Bank as Director of Resources and Communications. Trish is a leader in agriculture and an advocate for agricultural innovation and competitiveness. We are very honored to have her here to speak to us about when your opposition plays dirty. Please join me in welcoming Trish.
Yeah. Okay. Apparently I have to get hooked up here, so while I do that. Okay, so I did have a bit of a rough time getting here, so hopefully I'm worth it. And if I look a little old and tired, it's because I got into my hotel room at 3 a.m. last night. But actually, the truth is I am a little old and tired, so it's great to be here to speak to this group. One other little glitch I'll mention, you'll see there's no slides. Another little problem I ran into. So you're getting this talk with no pictures, so I'll try and make it as exciting for you as possible, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So when I was asked to speak to this group, they suggested that I talk a little bit about what's happening with consumers today, what's happening with consumer perceptions around agriculture and food. I do know a little bit about what happens when your opposition plays dirty. I'm sure anybody who knows Monsanto's history probably would understand that. But I don't think it's any secret to anybody in this room that the current dialogue around agriculture and food and modern agriculture is posing a very significant challenge to those of us who work in this industry. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe how this started, why it's happening, and maybe look a little bit to the future and see whether there's something positive down the road or whether we're going to continue to find ourselves in this difficult environment. So I'm going to share my thoughts on how and why opposition to modern agriculture has grown, how we got to where we are today, and how we might change that. And I'll admit that I don't think there's any real easy solution to turning the tide, but I also am a strong believer that with expanded voices, we've seen some improvement among what I call reasonable consumers that could shift the conversation from a dialogue versus a debate about, who is right or wrong. Is there one way to farm that's better than the other? Is there one way to eat that's better than the other? Is there one way to raise animals that's better than the other? Because those are quite simplistic discussions, as I'm sure you all know. And when I use the term modern agriculture, I'm describing pretty much the large majority of North American agriculture today. You will know that modern agriculture uses tools such as pesticides, fertilizers, technologies such as biotechnology, agronomics, data analytics, mechanization, precision ag. It's generally larger scale, it's highly innovative, it's sustainable, and it's allowing farmers to grow abundant quality food and raise protein using less energy, less soil, less water. Now, there are some people who have a different view of sustainability, and they're trying to drive consumers to eating and farming, or trying to drive consumers to eating and farming down their preferred pathway. And that pathway is pretty much the opposite of what I just described as modern agriculture. Of course, the alternative is small versus big. It's definitely organic at all costs versus conventional. It's natural, whatever that means, versus synthetic. And it's often emotion-based versus science-based. And today, the latest trend is moving towards vegetable-based protein versus animal-based protein, which is probably not a great message to talk to a bunch of swine farmers. But as an employee of Monsanto, I think those involved, and those of you who are involved in animal agriculture, these are huge perception challenges that we need to overcome. And I'm not immune to the views that, maybe Monsanto kind of started all the discussion in the first place. But I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. So right now, I want to pause for a minute. I want to read to you the opening paragraphs of a blog that I read recently from David Zaruk. That's Z-A-R-U-K. He's also known as the Riskmonger. You can follow him on Twitter. If anybody is interested in Twitter, it's @Zaruk, to learn more about him. And the reason I like reading his posts and articles are for a number of reasons. Number one, he tends to share information that I agree with. So John was talking about cognitive bias, right? You like hearing things that you agree with. He's not afraid to call a spade and rant about those who are driving the current narrative around food. And he talks about many of the trends driving food and agriculture today. So his latest blog is called In Praise of the Corporation. And I'm just going to read some opening words to you. It's dated March 12th, In Praise of the Corporation. You might be reading this on your laptop in a comfortably warm Uber that you arranged on your smartphone via a website storing your data in the cloud. The car is a hybrid built with advanced polymers, chemicals, and repurposed plastics. The coffee in your cup, recycled from used chewing gum, was freshly ground with an attractive hazelnut aroma. And it was paid for via an electric payment system on your watch, while you bit into a crisp apple in March that was perhaps 3 days off the branch. All of this is happening every day in cities around the world, something that we could not have possibly dreamt of a generation ago. You are benefiting from a large number of corporations that have made this moment possible. But before turning to read this blog, the last 3 messages you had received probably had focused on an indignation towards industry, business, and corporations that developed the products, tools, and services, allowing us to live longer, more comfortable, and prosperous lives. Still, we're told that our cancers, our illnesses, our shattered economy, our polluted seas, and poisoned earth result from some divine corporate neglect and malfeasance. How is it that the more we have received from industry, the more the public is filled with rage towards them? So, why did I choose to share those opening comments with you? And did they resonate with anybody in this room? Thank you. So it's not to advocate specifically for corporations or industries, although obviously I work for a big global multinational organization, and I personally do believe that corporations make many positive contributions to our day-to-day lives. But having said that, I want to be clear, and you heard it in my bio, that I've worked for many different organizational structures. I've worked for a farmer-owned cooperative, I've worked for a Christian-based NGO that worked with developing world farmers. It was not an activist NGO, by the way, even though many people there had strong opinions about multinational involvement and technology in developing world farming. I've worked for a quasi-government agency and now a corporation. I thoroughly enjoyed every single organizational structure, and I experienced and saw the strengths and weaknesses of them all. The reason I share David's comments with you is because I think they point to one of the key drivers influencing people's perceptions of food and agriculture today. This belief among activists or environmental social justice NGOs, or even many consumers, that corporations are bad, they cause harm, and therefore they couldn't possibly produce good food or have the best interests of consumers at heart. This perception among many consumers today is that modern agricultural technologies such as pesticides, GMOs, hormones, antibiotics are really used by farmers for one reason. And they think the only reason you use those tools is because you want to make more money. So hey, if you're a farmer raising animals or growing crops, yield and productivity we know are absolutely critically important and good things. And generating profit for your farm and your farm business is important to you and your family and even your community, I would argue. But based on the research that we've conducted with consumers, yield equates to profit, and generating profit is bad in their minds. And it's bad in their minds because they immediately equate profit coming at the expense of doing the right thing or saving the planet. So when farmers want to use these tools, it rings in the ears of consumers as having no benefit to them at all, and as corporate greed at the worst. And this idea that modern ag technologies are used just to make more money for farmers and ag companies is deeply ingrained. In part, it's because that's what we like to talk about as an industry. Companies like myself, like Monsanto, we've talked about driving yields higher for years and years and convincing farmers that we have the products to help them do just that. And farmers naturally are focused on yield and productivity. But the thing is, in order to change perceptions, we need to acknowledge that a lot of what we want to say runs counter to what a good chunk of consumers believe today. So the challenge is, how do we disrupt that perception? How do we change that conversation? Well, one of the big things is that we have to learn to communicate effectively about science in a consistent, uniform, and impactful way. And we need to be able to help people understand what we're working on now, how the technologies are applied in direct response to a problem, not a solution. And when I talk to a lot of skeptics or people that like to send me emails, that's what they say. They say, well, you just created this thing because you could, and you had a bunch of scientists who were brilliant working in labs. They don't understand that these products are actually created to provide a solution to a challenge that growers are facing. So improving the way we communicate or tell the story and the benefits of science in modern agriculture is a gateway to meeting many of the challenges we face with consumers. So just a show of hands out there, who thinks that we, collective we, not Trish Jordan or not Monsanto, are doing a poor job of talking about agriculture and what we're doing today? It's really bright out there, so I can't see. Okay, so not very many. Okay, who thinks we're starting to get a little bit better at talking with consumers and sharing our ag story? Okay, good.
Can you vote more than one?
No, you can't. But I'll get to that point, because I think if you're like me, I can argue either way, right? I can either argue away, and it all depends on whether I'm having a good day or whether I'm having a bad day. A bad day is when I get the nasty emails or I'm shown the latest docudrama on Netflix that lambaste agriculture. And then I have good days where I engage in a conversation with the consumer and I don't necessarily convince them that we're right, but at least I've got them to neutral and I've got them thinking about something else. I want to share with you some thoughts from a recent interview with Alan Alda. I think this crowd is maybe more my age, so everyone know who Alan Alda is. He was in MASH. He's also happens to be the host of a show these days on PBS called Scientific American Frontiers. And he just published a book on science communication. It's called, If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? And as he points out, nothing could be more serious than this communication barrier across all sciences. So not unique to agriculture, it's across all science. And here's what he says. People are dying because we can't communicate in ways that allow us to understand one another. It sounds like an exaggeration, but I don't think it is. When patients can't relate to their doctors and won't follow their orders, when engineers can't convince a town that the dam could break, when a parent can't win the trust of a child to warn her off a lethal drug, they can all be headed for a serious ending. So the message is clear. To get somewhere with our story, we need to change the way we tell it. And I'm sure Amy gave you a few tips about that yesterday. So my focus in my paying job at Monsanto covers many tasks and responsibilities, but these days I spend a good chunk of my time tirelessly trying to share information and tell stories to change the perception around modern agriculture. And when I'm engaged in conversations with consumers and ask them to list some of the tools that are used by farmers today to describe how they define modern agriculture, this is what comes to their minds, these 4 things. 2 of them are mine, 2 of them are yours. GMOs, pesticides, Sometimes they mention fertilizer, hormones, and antibiotics. Of course, we all know that modern agriculture is much, much more broader than that, and consumers just don't know it. So what we have found is that when we show them other things that are innovative about the tools farmers are using, they're much more receptive to engaging in a conversation. For instance, when we start to expose consumers to some of the digital tools farmers use today, such as smartphones, GPS, auto-drive tractors, yield and weather data, apps that they download onto their iPad or their iPhone, they're much more receptive to technology and science in agriculture. Well, why is this? Well, it works because it's intuitive to them. They're all familiar with how digital tools are already transforming other industries, and they view these sorts of applications of digital to ag as innovative, and they're very surprised to learn that there is another side of agriculture that they haven't heard about. The other really important thing for them is that it's beyond the plate, okay? It's one step removed from what they're eating, and digital tools don't come with that same sort of baggage as other platforms. Now, I know I titled my talk "When the Opposition Plays Dirty," so it's not quite as easy to change consumer perceptions or to get a less hostile discussion about agriculture with your neighbor as I might have just made it sound. Make no mistake, this is a tough battle. It's a battle for you as farmers. It's a battle for the elevation and respect of agriculture's importance in our society. It's a battle for personal safety and the ability to feed a growing world in a sustainable way. Others within our industry have termed this the journey to public trust, and many people within the Canadian ag sector, I can proudly say, are focused on strategies to help us move the needle. But there are still days when it's impossible to separate fact from fiction in agriculture, especially when you encounter somebody who's convinced they know the truth about what's happening with their food, or what's happening on your farm. After all, they read about it on the internet, or they watched the most recent Dr. Oz show. So, despite the challenge, I believe it's worthwhile, if not a critical necessity, for everyone involved in ag to make an effort to engage with the non-farming public. Now, I'm sure you can imagine in my role at Monsanto, I talk to a lot of skeptics, conspiracy theorists, opponents of modern agriculture, and those conversations are really tough, and the hot topics just keep coming up, okay? GMOs, pesticides, hormones, antibiotics. The other thing that I think is interesting for your industry, more on the animal ag side, is animal care and the whole end of life issue. Okay, consumers are really struggling with that end of life issue, i.e. we raise animals for our benefit. At some point they're going to have 364 great days, and they're going to have one bad day, and they don't always understand that. So anyway, my point is whether it's GMOs or pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, we share a lot of the common things. Now, earlier I mentioned that one of the key drivers was this focus on, or this distrust of corporations. A second key factor is the growth of social media, and John showed it even in his slides, with the uptake on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. People's connection to their phone and their ability to access instant information or voice their opinion on any number of social media channels has a significant influence on consumer perceptions of agriculture. So whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, blogs, websites, everyone has an opinion about agriculture and how their food should be grown. There are days when it feels like a relentless attack, not only on Monsanto, its products, and our people, but also on the agricultural sector as a whole, including you as members of this great industry and the farmers whether you're a farmer or whether you work with farmers. And so what we recognized probably about 3 or 4 years ago is that conversations were happening without us. We finally realized, it took us a long time, we admit that we made lots of mistakes, we're by no means perfect, but we admit that we kind of completely missed what was happening and around the conversation that consumers were having. So over the past three or 4 years, we've kind of really shifted that, and we've engaged in thousands of discussions or interactions with consumers, sharing positive stories to try and change the perceptions of modern agriculture. So you may say, well, what does this have to do with you, and why should you care? Well, I truly believe that a collective approach to telling our stories is required to change the perception of modern agriculture. And really what it's all about is to maintain your ability to provide the solutions that you provide to farmers, or if you're a farmer, to be able to continue to access the tools that you need. So another show of hands. How many of you have found yourself in the middle of a conversation, an uncomfortable one, about agriculture with somebody from the non-farming public? Okay. And anybody want to volunteer how that went for you? Good, bad? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Do you embrace those conversations? A little bit of both. Okay, good. I personally, at times, find them frustrating, okay? When you find yourself face to face with people who criticize Canadian farmers or Canadian agriculture, it seems completely natural that you would get defensive. And you may even want to lash out at times to those who question your industry. I certainly do. I've found myself, you know, that little bubble in my head wanting to kind of yell at them and say, like, come on, you don't have any clue what you're talking about. You don't understand. Why don't you take the time to learn about agriculture and all the great things our industry is doing? But then I kind of pause for a minute and I think, well, why should they know about what we're doing every single day in Canadian agriculture? Big contributors to the Canadian economy, but we're small, right, in the broader population context. You know, why should they know then? Have we shared our story and done it in a positive way? And the answer, I think, up until recently has been no. So what happened? Well, in that void, others stepped in to tell the story for us, and it's not very pretty. This was a big miss for us, not only as a company, but I think as the agricultural sector as a whole, and we've been playing catch up ever since. Now, don't get me wrong, I will never apologize for Monsanto focusing on its customers. The only people we sell to are farmers. Why wouldn't we focus on farmers? We now realize it's a much broader conversation. So, how did this all start? Well, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I don't think my parents were stressing over food, right? They grocery shop, they fed us, all was good. We had food. When I had my son, who's now 30, it's kind of scary, I think his birthday's next week. When I had my son, I wasn't a worried mother. Maybe I was a bad mother, but I fed him apple juice, I fed him baby food from the jar. I just wasn't that focused on food. But for many people, that situation today is completely different. And it really started with Europe's experience with food and food safety, starting to take a turn for the worse with mad cow back in 2000. People really lost faith in their regulators to keep them safe, and it was a simple connection for them. Sick cow leads to sick person, therefore eating beef is dangerous, it's going to cause me harm. Not quite that simplistic for those of you who may have been, intimately involved in that situation, but this is really where people started thinking, uh-oh, my food could hurt me or it could be dangerous. In North America, the modern activist opposition to GMOs was launched by a coordinated anti-biotic coalition that started the push for mandatory labeling of foods that contained crop ingredients derived from GMO seed around the 2011-2012 timeframe in the US. Now, if you think about that timing, GMOs had been in the marketplace since 1996, so they'd already been around for about 15 years already. But apparently, people didn't know because we didn't tell them. As I mentioned, we were busy with the science, the benefits the technology could provide to farmers. Adoption rates were quick, the products worked, farmers were producing more with less, everything was good. Unless, of course, you're part of a group that had a different view of how food should be grown. So these were really the early years of a formal, coordinated, emotionally driven campaign by anti-biotech industry advocates. And their playbook was designed to do a number of things. They wanted to undermine consumer confidence in the safety of the North American food supply. They wanted to undermine value chain confidence in demand. They wanted to force deselection at points along the value chain. Think the non-GMO verified butterfly label now. They definitely wanted to increase market share in organic and non-GMO. They wanted to raise funds to continue their campaign and pay for new ones. Now, when the US mandatory labeling initiative went to a vote in the fall of 2012, there were about 36 different state bills introduced across the country, plus the big California ballot initiative. I'm not sure if folks here followed it as closely as I did. But basically, every single one of these state bills and ballots were voted on and they were defeated. But it took a tremendous amount of investment from the food chain, including biotech developers and groups like the US grocery manufacturers. At the time, actually, life science companies were under a lot of pressure from the grocery manufacturers group because they didn't want to have to reformulate or label because of the cost. Now, the ballot initiative was framed as a right to know, and voters actually favored the right to know 3-1. But the bill would have been very problematic. It would have required GMO foods to be prominently labeled. There was an initial threshold of about 0.5%, but working towards 0 by 2019. There were some significant exemptions, including alcohol, dairy, meat, and restaurant meals. I'm missing a page here, that's okay. And then basically what happened is, because all these people kind of banded together, there was a lot of pressure and a lot of focus on this right to know. It sounds simple, right? Like, why don't I have a right to know? Well, we all know why we were opposed to that, because we knew that it would somehow imply that foods containing biotech crop ingredients were somehow less safe or inferior to conventionally or organically grown foods. And plain and simple, that's not true, number one, nor is it fair, number two. And we were a little stubborn as a company because we're a science-based company, right? So the science says this, why would you try and imply that the science is saying something else? So over the course of about 9 months from the kickoff in the fall of 2012, pretty much every major California daily paper endorsed a no vote on Proposition 37. But it was a very, very divisive campaign, and the no votes prevailed, but they prevailed by a very, very narrow margin. It was 48.6% in favor, 51.4% no. So this didn't really stop the food labeling efforts of the activists and their other groups. It really encouraged them and propelled them to do more. So they continued to push, and through 2013, there were state bills popping up all over the US. Thankfully, in Canada, we have a voluntary labeling standards board. The previous government does not support labeling, for consumer choice. Today's government does not support labeling for consumer choice. But in 2012, the Just Label It campaign garnered 1 million signatures, all asking the USDA for mandatory food labeling of GMOs, giving those opposed to using the technology significant momentum. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about who's behind this campaign. There was a huge coalition, a very broad, huge coalition of vocal groups and individuals who numbered about 300 plus different anti-GMO, pro-organic groups who generated opposition for a living. I do want to make a comment here, not opposed to organics, think organics are great, our company supports organic and organic farming. But there's a difference between organic activists and those who are farming organics because they believe it's the right thing to do. So some of these groups were multinationals, while others were small grassroots groups who have a different vision of agriculture and food, one that does not involve plant science technologies, does not involve pesticides, antibiotics to assist sick animals, or any other modern agricultural tool. The scary part, and what a lot of people don't understand, is that this coalition was virtually as well funded as we were and remains so today. In 2011, this coalition had annual US dollar revenues at their disposal of around $2.5 billion. Since that time, it's estimated the revenues of the same coalition have grown to 3, 4, and possibly even $5 billion US dollars annually. So while some of this money is used to is allocated to running their companies or their charities, there's still a significant amount of funding allocated to what I call their cause. So what are they doing with that money? Well, they attack modern agriculture, they denigrate the amount of land required to raise protein, they criticize how farmers care for their animals. Most notable, their whole goal is to create fear and confusion with the objective of scaring consumers, all to serve their own positions or support their own businesses or charitable causes. The other thing is they're extremely well organized and interconnected. So while one day they might be focused on GMO related issues, the next day they may shift and focus on pesticides or may focus on animal agriculture. Right now, I don't know if you guys have noticed the shift, but there is a relentless attack on glyphosate. Why? Because it's Monsanto's chemistry, even though many other people make glyphosate. And it's also quite ironic to me because glyphosate is the most widely used chemistry on the planet in both urban and agricultural settings, and it is one of the most safest herbicides in the world. But hey, it's a pretty easy fact to ignore if you're fighting for a cause and if you want to play dirty. So because they're so well connected, like I said, they can run multiple campaigns, shift their focus. For a few months it might be GMOs, next year it might be animal care. They just keep recycling all these campaigns. So what I'm getting at is while these groups are largely or predominantly focused on agricultural biotech, they have the ability to switch. And as I mentioned earlier, it could be corporations that they don't like, it could be challenging food or agricultural practices, or it just could be the environment or alternative health and lifestyle options. So who are these groups and individuals? Well, is anyone familiar with Stonyfield Organics? Big US organic company, probably the largest in the US. It's run by a guy named Gary Hirschberg and his friend Sam Kamen. They run a multi-billion-dollar business, and they do it by denigrating any type of agriculture that's not organic. They're one of several funders who organize planned campaigns against the tools of modern agriculture. They've got a website, they've developed a series of videos using kids. They actually have kids talking about how bad pesticides and GMOs are. They're in the schools. They have their tentacles everywhere. That's just one example. For someone like me who deals with these groups every day and has to react to their campaigns, there are several other household names that you may be familiar with. Greenpeace, the Pesticide Action Network, the Food Revolution Network, the Center for Food Safety in the US, which is largely known for launching lawsuits to slow down the regulatory process, the Organic Consumers Association, websites like Mercola.com and Natural News that plug supplements and other kind of health products that basically don't work. Their funding sources are immense, and agriculture has a really hard time keeping up. The North American ag biotech or modern ag opposition continues to evolve today. They adapt, rise, fall, rise again as new fundraising opportunities emerge. They focus on issues when public interest and opportunities are present. Sometimes they'll ship out of agriculture, go to other issues like global warming, fracking, those sorts of things. And their goal, unfortunately, is not to pursue lasting solutions. So they're frequently involved in recurring battles on the same issues against the same people and the same organizations. And unfortunately, or I don't know, sometimes I argue maybe it's fortunate for me because I think I have a job for life. Monsanto's the target, right? So, I mean, every single day I walk in that office, I don't know what's going to happen, but I find it fascinating and I find it fun. The only thing that's frustrating is that I'm not allowed to lie like they do, so. What I find perplexing, though, within the consumer base and trying to understand, well, why does this have an impact? Why is this working? There's so many people that seem to be turning their backs on science and technology or are willing to argue that innovation is bad, particularly when you consider that the large majority of consumers accept science and technology in absolutely every aspect of their lives, whether it's medicine, cars, entertainment, iPhones, computers, yet they're not prepared to let farmers utilize science and technology to grow food in a better way. Very frustrating. So what did we learn from that early days of the Just Label It campaign? Well, the first thing we learned is we cannot outspend the anti-biotech industry. And it's very difficult to fight a consumer's right to know. So what we learned is that when we win, because if it's really about winning and losing, we won the vote, okay? We won Prop 37. We win most of our legal cases, Monsanto versus Percy Smizer from Western Canada. Everybody know that one? Took me all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. That was fun. Other USDA court victories, we've won them, right? The one I can think of is Roundup Ready alfalfa, reinstating the commercial sale and planting of Roundup Ready alfalfa. But we can't sustain that. We simply didn't have the money. And why is that? Well, we're an R&D company, right? So all our revenues, or the large chunk of our revenues, go back into research and development to bring new solutions to our customers, the farmer. And that's really where we need to spend. Now, before it gets really depressing, I think it's important to pause for a minute and resist the urge to let all this negativity encompass our every thought or think that these problems are insurmountable. They're not, but it's, as I mentioned, it's a long, long road. But keep in mind that the folks who will never change their mind, there are those people out there, they have a different goal. They're still in the minority, probably about 10 to 20% of the overall North American population. So what about the rest of consumers? Well, 10 to 20% are probably like most of you in this room. They don't have an issue with what's happening in agriculture today. They see that they have abundant, safe food. They're okay with the application of science and technology to agriculture, particularly on the animal welfare side, right? Everybody wants to protect their pets. Everybody wants to protect their animals. They can seem to understand that. So if you do the math, that leaves a pretty good chunk of people who just don't know who or what to believe. And this is the group in the middle that I kind of call the mushy middle. Sometimes they'll have questions, some may even have significant concerns, but they aren't those radical zealots that refuse to move. And while they may at times ask you what seem like really silly or accusatory questions, they generally just want to know what's going on in our industry. And so these are the folks we want and need to listen to and share with, not those on the extreme edges of the conversation. Now, the activists and the food zealots aren't going away, and you may find yourself engaged in a frustrating conversation with them, but don't let their extreme viewpoints color your perception of the average consumer, because that may force you to not want to engage, and I think that's the wrong thing to do. So I want to finish my talk today talking a bit about animal activism. After all, everybody, I'm assuming, here in this room is earning a living from animal agriculture. And as mentioned, this is not a world that I typically live in, so I'm treading a bit on thin ice as far as being an expert, and I know there are others much more qualified to speak on this area. But as mentioned, the attack on protein-based eating is very like the attack on GMOs or pesticides. Some have decided that these things are not good, not right for our planet, and therefore we need to get rid of them. When I was at our Industry Association conference in December, we had a dietitians panel that talked to our group about emerging food trends. And when they asked each of these dietitians what they thought the big food trend in 2018 was going to be, anyone have an idea of what they said? It's veganism. Ooh, yeah, that's not good for you guys. Not just vegetarianism, but veganism, much more extreme version. It's a world in which animals are not consumed for our benefit. Instead, it recommends we should move to plant-based protein sources to have less impact on the planet. Again, I will state that I have no right to question people's food choices. I just would prefer if those food choices were informed ones that don't denigrate one legitimate production method over another. So today, animal activism looks a bit different than it did in like the 1970s and 1980s when people took extreme measures to protect farm animals. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the many tactics to share animal cruelty videos from production facilities or efforts to break into farms to free animals. And as John pointed out, it's really easy to stage a video and make it look like this is what's happening. In the large majority of those cases, what people were seeing was not reality. Anybody here seen Food Inc.? Oh my goodness, if you're in the animal world, you better watch Food Inc. I'm going to give you more Netflix to watch too, even though they'll make you mad. It's the same sort of thing, right? It's this picture of animal agriculture that is simply not true. But like modern agricultural activists, animal activists today are targeting large-scale production practices such as egg, pork, or beef production. They too are well-funded, very media-savvy, and often seek to stop using animals for meat, transportation, or entertainment through legislation and public pressure. So, varying degrees, but most of these really serious animal activists believe that animals are the same as humans, they're pets, all animals deserve to run free and live forever. Again, completely unrealistic, but that's what they believe. So they don't believe that animals are meant as a means to nourish our bodies with protein. They believe it's bad for the environment, and they actually passionately, genuinely believe that we don't need them. We can get all our protein-based requirements from plant-based options. So talk a little bit about Netflix. I'm not a big Netflix watcher, but I've been forced to watch Netflix. My son signed me up. I still pay $9.99 a month. I'm not sure what for, because I watch about a couple of videos a year. But if you go there, there is no shortage of animal cruelty docudramas that students and consumers can watch. So from Food Inc. to Mitocracy to Cowspiracy, these videos are all geared towards driving people to stop eating animal-based protein. And sadly, they're targeting younger and younger children. My 15-year-old niece recently declared she was a vegetarian, and her 12-year-old brother came home from school the other day and told his dad, "Dad, we have to get rid of all the meat in our house and any food that contains GMOs." So these videos, even though they do not remotely represent the realities of animal agriculture and the care that farmers show for their animals, in the name of fighting for a cause, it simply doesn't matter. And truth does not matter when your opponents play dirty. The most recent stat I read from the Animal Ag Alliance group in the US, this is a group that monitors activists and activities in the livestock and meat sector, is that the activist organizations in the US focused on animal agriculture bring in about $500 million a year, mostly from donations. And most of that, we all know, does not go to helping animals. It goes to lobbying, staffing, and running campaigns. So if you want to get an idea of the promotion of clean eating or vegetable-based eating, go to the Food Revolution Network website, listen to the video introduction from Ocean Robbins. Yes, his name is Ocean. These are the kind of online groups some consumers are listening to. After all, why wouldn't you listen to somebody named Ocean who grew up in a log cabin built by his parents? That's what he says in the video. You can't get more natural than that. Of course, he fails to tell his viewers that him and his father are running a multi-billion-dollar business steering people to their view of healthy, natural food. Now, the good news is that currently less than 3% of the North American population is vegan. But when people are looking for information, it's very, very difficult to find accurate, balanced, current information on the internet or social media. So whether it's the move to cage-free, grass-fed, free-range, these practices are starting to be required by major food suppliers because this is what consumers are asking for. What gives me hope for animal agriculture, just to close, and my right to access a good steak, I'll tell you, I love my vegetables, but I love animal-based protein as well, so hopefully I'm a friend of yours. Global trends will tell you that the move to veganism is truly a North American trend primarily, so that's encouraging. The other thing is the growth of the world population, rising masses of people in other countries moving from subsistence farming to the middle classes predicts a greater demand for animal-based protein. And I know this from my work traveling in the developing world, working for subsistence farmers. The first thing they do when they get a little bit of disposable income is they want to add protein to their diet to supplement their nuts, their vegetables, and their grains. And that's still the driving need for animal protein today and into the future. So we've all heard the stats. The world's going to grow by potentially 9 to 10 billion people by the year 2050, and these people are going to need to be fed. So the big question is, how do we do that sustainably? How do we find better ways to produce more on our existing land base, or even a smaller land base? And it's a challenge that rests squarely on the shoulders of farmers and agriculture. So can we meet this challenge? I believe we can. Despite the opposition, the folks like you who work in this industry, who are applying the latest tools and technologies to care for your animals and grow feed to be healthy and productive. The pendulum is going to switch back, or it should, in my opinion, and if it doesn't, I'm equally convinced that new technologies are on the horizon that will be applied to agriculture so that farmers, whether they're growing crops or raising animals, will continue to have the ability to grow food in a way that allows our planet to thrive. So those who play dirty will continue to do so. That's my message. They're not going away, but I think we're going to find a way to coexist and each pursue our own causes. Thank you. Thanks. Are there any questions? Or?
I think we might have time for one quick question, if anyone has one.
It's really bright.
It's bright, yeah.
Oh, there's one at the back. No questions? Okay, I'll be around for a bit if anybody wants to chat.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trish. I'm so grateful that you were able to come out and visit us here in London, Ontario. You faced many challenges in your role at Monsanto, and we appreciate that you are willing to come and share your experience with us. So another round for Trish.